Welcome to the third part of Chapter 11. As we discuss expatriate compensation, it's important to remember what the objectives of the compensation package are. In every organization, we try to construct compensation packages that help us recruit the talent that we need, retain that talent, and keep individuals motivated to execute organizational tasks. The same applies to expatriates. We want to make sure that expatriate compensation is attractive enough to attract people to take on foreign assignments. Sometimes taking on a foreign assignment can mean uprooting one's family, making sacrifices in terms of dual career couples employment, relocating children for their education, leaving family and friends behind. And so the compensation package has to be attractive enough to make it worth the expatriate's while. Expatriate compensation package must be attractive to skilled managers so that we can get those skilled individuals to relocate to our international subsidiaries and help accomplish organizational goals. At the same time, organizations want to manage compensation packages effectively and efficiently to reduce the ever-rising costs of compensation. So organizations want to be fair and adequate, but also at the same time manage the costs associated with expatriate relocation. One important consideration when constructing expatriate compensation packages is the differential in cost of living. Many countries will have significantly different costs associated with living. Cost of living is calculated based on a basket of goods. You might have heard of the Big Mac Index. The Big Mac Index is used to calculate cost of living differentials across countries. The objective of a cost of living allowance is to make sure that the expatriate enjoys purchasing power parity, meaning that the expatriate can afford to purchase the same goods and services as he or she was able to at home, and not suffer a decline in their standard of living. Some other variables that might go into consideration in structuring the compensation package are local hardship differentials. Some destinations will involve significant hardship. For example, living in a Muslim country might represent some hardship for female expatriates or spouses of male expatriates who will not be able to work and have to comply with some restrictions that are present in those locations on women. Some locations represent hardship in terms of climate and harsh climate, or risk in terms of physical risk as a result of environmental causes, pollution, earthquakes, or political unrest. And so when we send individuals to hardship locations, we very often add what is called a hardship premium to the compensation package to make up for those challenges. The State Department offers a listing that compares hardship across locations to be able to calculate those. Also, very often organizations will simply offer a sign-on bonus to expatriates to attract them to taking on a new assignment. This can be paid out in a lump sum or in increments over the course of the first year. And essentially, it's a form of sign-on bonus to incentivize, again, people to go through the difficulties that are involved in uprooting one's family and moving to another country. Other allowances that are very often added to the compensation package are a housing allowance. This could be a calculation of how much the expatriate pays for housing in the home country, mortgage or rent, and then adding that as a proportion of the compensation package in the foreign country. Sometimes organizations, multinationals, will own housing in foreign markets to house expatriates. Every company will have its own arrangement. But a housing allowance is very often added because in many major cities around the world, housing is very expensive and tends to also be quite smaller than the standard American home. Another important consideration in the compensation package is taxation. Americans are taxed for their global income. Because American citizens are taxed for their global income, it is likely that even when working abroad, those individuals will be taxed in the United States, and in certain situations might also be taxed in the country in which they are working, which represent a situation of dual taxation or double taxation. And so most multinationals will employ the services of local accounting firms to make sure to protect the expatriates from this double taxation. And each organization might take on a different approach. Some ensure that the expatriate pays all the taxes they are due in their home country, in the US, on their own, and then taxes in the host country are paid by the organization. Other companies might take on different approaches. The important thing to remember is that taxation can be a very important point, especially in high taxation countries like many nations in the European Union. Another important aspect of the compensation package are benefits, and these include health insurance, retirement savings, and other types of benefits. Not all nations around the world permit pre-tax distributions to retirement plan, and so organizations need to make sure that expatriates can continue saving for retirement as they would have been able to if they hadn't taken on the international assignment. In terms of health insurance, it's important to make sure that expatriates and their families receive comparable coverage and comparable quality of care to what they received at home. And so very often, multinationals will purchase additional health insurance for their expatriates to make sure that they can receive the same quality of care as they received in their home countries. Of course, there are some other allowances that might be factored into the compensation package. For example, if the expatriate relocates with a spouse, very often the spouse is not immediately able to work, and so multinationals might offer a spouse allowance, which can help make up for the loss of income of the spouse. If the expatriate is traveling with children who need to attend international schools that are very often private and quite expensive, there might be education allowance added to the compensation package to pay for that education for the expatriate children. If job retraining or certification is necessary for the expatriate's wife or husband so that they can also work in the host country, that is often also covered under the education allowance. There are several approaches to constructing compensation package for an expatriate. The balance sheet is one approach and a very popular one in American multinationals. The balance sheet approach seeks to balance purchasing power in the host country and making sure that the expatriate has purchasing power parity. As I explained earlier, this means that the expatriate has the same purchasing power in the host country as they had at home and do not suffer a loss in standard of living. And so in the balance sheet approach, the base pay is rooted in the home country. And so my base pay would be very similar to what I earned in the home country and is supplemented with other allowances, as I explained in the previous slide. These allowances adjust for differences in taxation and protection from dual taxation, allowances for cost of living, if the cost of living in the host country is much higher, allowance for housing to ensure that housing is comparable to what the expatriate had at home. Often there is also an allowance for recreation or membership in clubs if this is considered relevant to the location. Education allowance, as I mentioned earlier, and home furnishing, which very often covers either the relocation of personal goods from the home country to the host country or purchasing new furnishings in the host country. And medical care, which I just explained. In addition to matching purchasing power, firms might also offer foreign service premiums, which is the sign-on bonus that I mentioned. It can range from 10 to 20% of base pay. It might be paid out in a lump sum or in portions over a certain period of time. A hardship allowance might be added for destinations that are considered hardship destinations if it is due to climate, living conditions, political unrest, or other physical risk. The State Department publishes a list of different hardship categorizations across the world. A relocation allowance pays for the expatriate, him or herself, and the family to relocate to the host country, and very often also covers the cost of the move if the expatriate is moving personal household furnishings and other goods. A home leave allowance is very often offered, which includes a once a year paid home leave. And so the expatriate can go home and reconnect with friends and family. The reason why a home leave allowance is offered is because in general, most multinationals will plan to repatriate expatriates once their assignment is over and reintegrate them into the home organization so as to benefit from all of the global experience that they gained. Allowing people to go home once a year and reconnect with friends and family makes the return integration a lot easier. Some organizations might also offer rest and relaxation allowances. This is especially likely in hardship locations where individuals are likely to experience hardship, and so the organization, in addition to a home leave allowance, might also give an allowance to go to a third destination, not host or home countries, to take a break from the hardship situation in the host country. Other approaches, in addition to the balance sheet approach, includes headquarters-based compensation. Headquarters-based compensation pays home country wages regardless of location. This means that the organization has a global compensation strategy, and all organizational members are paid based on their job status or their ranking or their job responsibilities worldwide in a consistent way. And so this eliminates some of the differences that can be caused when organizations pay based on the home country of the expatriate rather than home country of headquarters. A host country-based compensation is also known as the going rate approach, and it is different from the balance sheet approach. The balance sheet approach roots compensation in the home country, and the going rate approach roots compensation in the host country. And so this type of approach to compensation makes sure that there is more equity between expatriates and host country nationals because the basis of compensation is in the host country. One of the challenges of the balance sheet approach is that it roots compensation in the home country, which often can be quite higher than compensation in the host country, which can create significant differentials and perceptions of inequity between expatriates and host country nationals. Other organizations will have global pay systems, which look to globally integrate the organization and have worldwide job evaluations, performance appraisal methods, and salary scales. And so your pay will be determined according to a global standard rather than a standard rooted in your home country or in the host country in which you are working. Because these approaches to compensation can be quite complex and quite difficult to manage, more and more organizations are moving towards a lump sum or a cafeteria plan. This means that people are paid on a worldwide basis based on their job descriptions and their personal characteristics, much like they would be domestically. And then in order to take on an international assignment, they are given a lump sum as a way to incentivize them to take on the assignment, but they are not given any additional allowances. The cafeteria plan is similar to the lump sum plan, but allows expatriates to have a certain number of allowances. Many organizations might have a generous compensation plan for the first year, but then slowly take away different allowances once the expatriate is better rooted in the host country. This is a purpose to reduce the costs associated with international compensation from the organizational side. It's important to understand and remember that there is potential for conflict when compensation packages are discussed. The expatriate, on the one hand, is going to want to make sure that he or she and their family are protected and are not going to suffer a loss in quality of life. And so the expatriate is going to be motivated to seek higher compensation, whereas the multinational is going to seek efficiency and equity, but not with an effort to reduce cost. And so it's important to recognize the potential for conflict and always remember that there is a common goal for the expatriate and the multinational, which is a successful assignment. And so compensation packages should be attractive enough to encourage people to take on expatriate assignments in areas that are critical to the multinational. Multinationals must be mindful of the costs associated with compensation and seek to be as effective and efficient as possible. If the compensation package is well constructed, the expatriates will have stability in terms of lifestyle and economic status in the host country, which is likely to make adjustments to the host country a lot easier. Multinationals should seek to treat all expatriates fairly and consistently. If expatriates are going to experience economic hardship while overseas, it is unlikely that future individuals would be interested or willing to take on expatriate assignments. And so multinationals should seek to develop a compensation strategy that is consistent throughout the organization. And of course, the larger and more globally dispersed the organization, the more complicated this is going to be. Administrating these compensation packages can be quite difficult. This is actually the key challenge of the balance sheet approach because it requires separate administration for each location in which the multinational is located. And so it can be quite time-consuming and costly to administer. And the last consideration is re-entry. At the end of the day, when we send an expatriate abroad for 3 to 5 years, the final objective is for that individual to return home with his or her newly acquired global mindset to be reintegrated into the organization. And so we want to make sure that the compensation package enables us to seamlessly reintegrate the expatriate into the organization in terms of compensation. Repatriation is actually a quite important component of the expatriation process. And best practices recommend not leaving repatriation on the table to be handled once the expatriate returns and treating it as an afterthought. That successful repatriation needs to happen as a forethought, and that organizations that are sending individuals abroad need to think about repatriation when the expatriate actually leaves. A lot of expatriates turn over shortly after returning from international assignments, and many organizations actually define that as expatriate failure. Expatriate failure, as we discussed earlier, is when the expatriate fails to complete his or her assignment or returns home prematurely. But many organizations also categorize failure to retain an expatriate post-repatriation as failure, because if you are not able to retain that expatriate and find a position for him or her in-house, this individual is going to leave your company and most likely join a competitor in a similar industry or the same industry and share his or her globally minded new knowledge that you have paid for essentially and are allowing your competitors to benefit from. And so many organizations give careful consideration to repatriation. Some of the difficulties that managers face when returning to their home countries include cultural problems. For example, experiencing reverse culture shock. If you have spent 3 to 5 years in a different country, you have acculturated and adjusted and might actually experience reverse culture shock when going home. And this might happen both in the work environment, but also in the personal, social environment, in interacting with friends and family. Expatriates are going to need to relearn how to communicate with others in the home organization and are going to need to adjust to the basic living environment in their home country. Most of us don't think about reverse culture shock, but it's a well-documented phenomenon that many expatriates are challenged by. Other problems pertain to the organization. Many expatriates who return home are not always able to put their international experience to use and find that their domestic colleagues often discount their international experience, which can be very frustrating. Also, many organizations do not always have a job lined up for returning expatriates. Sometimes expatriates return to jobs that are perceived as a demotion if they are only a lateral move or an actual demotion. Many expatriates take on international assignments because they believe that it will serve as a vehicle for career progression and an opportunity for future promotion. And so when that doesn't materialize, it can create some disappointment, and expatriates might decide to leave the organization for other opportunities. And so many organizations need to plan for a career path post-return and avoid putting expatriates into temporary assignments or positions that represent a lateral move or a demotion. One additional issue that expatriates often face is the loss of autonomy. Many times expatriates are sent overseas to run a subsidiary or have a very senior position in a foreign subsidiary. And once they return home and are reintegrated into headquarters or home country offices, they lose a lot of the autonomy and decision-making autonomy that they had while abroad, which can be very frustrating. Things that multinationals can do to successfully repatriate expatriates is to plan ahead for repatriation. Often multinationals will assign expatriates a mentor in the host country to help people adjust to the culture and society in the host country. Other multinationals include a mentor in their home country as well. The mentor can make sure that the expatriate is not suffering from the out of sight, out of mind syndrome, keep the expatriate informed and connected to what's happening at home, and also make sure that the expatriate's name is mentioned when career opportunities open up. It's also important that multinationals not make promises that they are unable to keep, because this is a violation of what is referred to as the psychological contract. If I take on a foreign assignment because my boss promised me a promotion upon return, if I return and that promotion is not granted, I perceive a violation of a psychological contract. Maybe there was no signed paper contract in the traditional sense, but a promise was still made, and the expatriate is likely to be disappointed and possibly quit the organization. Multinationals also need to emphasize the strategic purpose of the repatriation and allow expatriates to put their new skills to use and make sure that their global mindset and their international connections that they form during their foreign assignments are put to use at the home office. Many organizations have teams in place to assist expatriates upon return and reach out to the expatriate well ahead of return to plan for their return home, both in the logistical sense, but also in terms of career planning and looking ahead at opportunities that exist in the organization, both in the home country and worldwide. Some expatriates may choose to return home. Others might go from one assignment to another assignment in a different country. As I mentioned earlier, home visits are also important to make sure that the expatriate stays in touch. Many multinationals who offer home visit allowances require that the expatriate come to the home office to reconnect with colleagues and peers and their mentor. And the last thing that organizations can do is to make sure that expatriates are well prepared for the reverse culture shock. Most people don't expect to experience this, and so it's important for representatives from HR or the individual's mentor to make sure that the expatriates know what to expect, understand what reverse culture shock is, that then they themselves and their families might experience it, and prepare them for successfully returning to the home country and reintegrating both socially and in their places of work. This concludes section 3, and in the next section we'll look at female expatriates and at strategic human resource management in global multinationals.